My son called. "I put your house up for sale this morning. You have until Friday to pack. Don't make this harder." "I put your house up for sale this morning. You have until Friday to pack. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That's what my son said. No hello. No how are you. Just those words, flat and final, like he was reading off a list of errands. Then he hung up. I stood there in my kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. The coffee pot was dripping behind me, that slow, familiar sound I've heard every morning for decades. Monday. He called on a Monday. Friday was 5 days away. My hands didn't shake. That's the strange part. When you hear something that should crack you open, sometimes your body just goes quiet instead. My hands hung at my sides like they belonged to someone else, like they'd forgotten they were mine. I set the phone down on the counter next to the sugar bowl, the one with the little chip on the rim that Earl always said gave it character. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Everything normal, everything the same, while my whole life tilted sideways. I'm Marlene, 76 years old. I've lived in this house for 52 years. My husband, Earl, died 3 years ago in the bedroom at the end of the hall. My son, Garrett, is 49. His wife, Tanya, is 47. And apparently, without telling me, without asking me, without so much as a warning, my son had become the owner of my home. I thought I'd signed a power of attorney for bills. "Just to make things easier, Mom," he'd said. "Just in case something happened. Just so he could help." I didn't know the paper I signed had taken everything.
Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Do you know whose name is on the deed to your house? Think about it. Marlene thought she knew too.
The day I signed those papers, I'd just come back from the cemetery. It was the first anniversary of Earl's death, and I'd spent the morning sitting on the little stone bench they put near his grave, talking to him the way I always did, telling him about the birds I'd seen that week, about the leak in the bathroom faucet I still hadn't fixed, about how the neighborhood kids had started a lemonade stand on the corner and I'd bought 3 cups even though I didn't want any. The grass around his stone had grown a little long. I'd need to call the maintenance people about that. Earl would have hated it. He kept our lawn like a golf course, mowed every Saturday morning, edged so crisp you could cut yourself on the lines. I'd let things slide since he died. Not on purpose. Just things slip away from you when you're carrying grief. You don't notice how much you're dropping until you look around and realize you're standing in a pile of all the things you used to manage. When I got home, Garrett was already there, parked in the driveway. I remember being surprised. He didn't visit much anymore, maybe once a month, sometimes less. He always had reasons. Work was busy. The kids had activities. Tanya needed him for something. There was always something more important than his mother sitting alone in the house where he grew up. Tanya never came inside anymore. She'd sit in the car with her phone, engine running, like she couldn't spare the gas to turn it off. Sometimes she'd wave at me through the windshield, a little flick of her fingers that wasn't really a greeting. Mostly, she'd just stare at her screen like I wasn't there. "Mom, I've been thinking," Garrett said as I unlocked the front door. He was carrying a folder, the kind with a metal clasp, and he held it against his chest like it was something precious. "You've got a lot on your plate. Bills, maintenance, all that stuff Dad used to handle. What if I took some of that off your hands?" I was tired. My eyes were still red from crying at the cemetery, and my head felt stuffed with cotton. I remember thinking how nice it was that he'd thought of me, that he wanted to help. I remember feeling grateful. How sad is that? grateful that my own son was willing to spend an hour of his day on his mother. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him cereal before school, where Earl and I had done our taxes every April, where I'd kneaded bread dough on Sunday mornings for 40 years. The wood was worn smooth in certain spots from all those years of use. I could trace the history of our family in those marks if I wanted to. Garrett spread out the papers and pointed to little yellow tabs. He'd prepared it all in advance, everything neat and organized. The yellow tabs stuck up like little flags marking the places where I was supposed to surrender pieces of my life. Just sign here, here, and here. It's nothing major. Just gives me the ability to handle your accounts if something happens. You don't want to end up like Mrs. Patterson down the street, right? Utilities shut off, mail piling up, nobody to sort things out. Mrs. Patterson had died alone, and they didn't find her for 4 days. I'd thought about it more than I wanted to admit. In the dark hours of the night, when the house was too quiet and the bed was too big, I'd wondered what would happen to me. Who would know? Who would care? Who would even notice if I just stopped? I signed without reading. The print was small and my glasses were in the other room, and Garrett was already sliding the papers back into the folder before I could ask questions. His hands moved quickly, efficiently, like a card sharp collecting his winnings. "That's it," he said, standing up. "All done. You don't have to worry about anything now." He kissed my cheek, a quick, dry peck that barely touched skin, and then he was gone. Tanya's car pulled out of the driveway before I even made it to the window. She hadn't come in. She never did, not since the wedding. Not since she'd looked around my house that first time with those calculating eyes and said, "It's so cozy." Like a time capsule. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of thinking I was protected, taken care of, when really I was being hollowed out from the inside like a termite-eaten beam. I remember the weeks after that signing. I felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. I told myself it was because I didn't have to worry about bills anymore, about all those little administrative tasks that had piled up since Earl died. I told myself Garrett was taking care of things. He wasn't taking care of anything. He was waiting, like a cat watching a mouse, knowing it doesn't have to hurry because the trap is already set. The first sign something was wrong came about 3 months later. I got a letter from the county. Something about property taxes. I called Garrett to ask about it since he was supposed to be handling all that now. "Don't worry about it, Mom," he said. His voice was distracted, like he was doing something else while we talked. "It's probably just a notice. I'll take care of it." "But it says there's an amount due." "Mom," I said, "I'll handle it." He hung up without saying goodbye. That should have been my first warning. My Garrett, the old Garrett, the one I remembered, would never have hung up on me like that. But I told myself he was busy. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself all the things mothers tell themselves when they don't want to see what's right in front of them. I should tell you about the shoes. It's a small thing, the kind of thing you're not supposed to notice or mention because it sounds petty. But small things are never just small, are they? They're symptoms. They're the first crack in the foundation that you convince yourself is just settling. Before Garrett married Tanya, he always took off his shoes at my door. Earl and I had that rule: no outdoor shoes on the carpet. It wasn't about being fancy. We just knew what it cost to keep things nice, and we couldn't afford to replace the carpet every few years. So shoes came off. Everyone knew. Visitors, neighbors, family. They all kicked off their sneakers in the front hall like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. After the wedding, Garrett stopped. Not all at once. The first few times, he forgot, and I reminded him gently, and he apologized and slipped them off. Then he started forgetting more often. Then he stopped apologizing. Then, one day, I reminded him, and he looked at me with this expression: annoyed, impatient, like I was a child asking a stupid question. "Mom, I'm not going to take my shoes off every time I come in. It's ridiculous. Nobody does that anymore." I didn't argue. What would I say? "Take off your shoes, you're 40 years old." He'd look at me like I'd lost my mind. Tanya would roll her eyes. She was good at that, the eye roll that made you feel like you'd just said something incredibly stupid without her having to waste words on you. So I stopped asking, and he'd walk right in, boots and all, tracking whatever he'd stepped in across the living room. Mud, gravel, salt from the winter streets. Once, something that looked like dog droppings from the park near his office. I'd find little trails of debris ground into the fibers, and I'd get down on my hands and knees to scrub them out because the vacuum had gotten too heavy for me to push. My knees would ache for days afterward. The arthritis in my fingers would flare up from the scrubbing. Sometimes I'd have to stop halfway through because my back seized up, and I'd just lie there on the floor, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the pain to pass. But I did it because that's what you do. You keep things nice. You don't make a fuss. You maintain what you have. One time, about a year after they got married, Tanya came inside to use the bathroom. She saw me on my knees, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain near the front door. "Oh, Marlene," she said, and there was something in her voice. Not quite sympathy, more like satisfaction. "You really should get a cleaning service. At your age, this can't be good for you." "I manage fine," I said. I didn't look up at her. I didn't want her to see my face. "Well, if you ever need help." She let the sentence trail off, meaningless. She didn't mean it. We both knew she didn't mean it. After she left, I sat back on my heels and looked at the stain I'd been working on. It was almost gone. Just a faint shadow remained, barely visible unless you knew where to look. I knew where to look. I always knew. Looking back, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. Or maybe he didn't think about it at all, which might be worse. Either way, those boots on my carpet were a message. This isn't really yours anymore. You're just living in it. The morning after Garrett's phone call, I drove to the real estate office on Main Street. My hands shook on the steering wheel the whole way there, and I had to pull over once because my vision went blurry and I realized I was crying without knowing I'd started. I sat in the parking lot of a Wendy's for 15 minutes, staring at the drive-through sign, trying to get myself together. A woman my age crying in public. People would think I was senile, confused, lost. They'd try to help in that pitying way that makes you feel like you're already half gone. I didn't want that. I wanted to walk into that real estate office with my spine straight and my voice steady and my questions sharp. I wiped my face with the napkins from my glove compartment, checked my hair in the rearview mirror, and drove the rest of the way. The office was cold and bright, all glass and chrome and that artificial lemon smell they pump through the vents. Everything looked expensive and uncomfortable, designed to impress rather than welcome. A young woman at the front desk looked up when I came in, her smile automatic and empty. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about a property listing," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. 412 Maple Drive. I believe there's been some kind of mistake. She typed something into her computer, squinting at the screen with eyes that looked tired despite her youth. 412 Maple. Yes, here it is. Listed yesterday. $485,000. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, quarter-acre lot. She looked up at me with that same blank smile. Are you interested in scheduling a showing? I live there, I said. The smile flickered. I'm sorry? I live there. That's my house. I've lived there for 52 years. Since before you were born. Since before your parents were probably born. She blinked, then looked back at the screen like it might give her instructions on how to handle crazy old ladies who wander in off the street. The listed owner is Garrett Hollis. Is that your husband? My son. Oh. She shifted in her chair, suddenly uncomfortable. Well, according to our records, Mr. Hollis is the property owner. He contacted us last week to begin the listing process. Everything's in order, legally speaking. If there's a family dispute, you'd need to take that up with... Thank you, I said, cutting her off. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew where I needed to go next. The county clerk's office was across town, in a building that hadn't been updated since the 70s. Brown carpet, fluorescent lights, that particular government smell of old paper and floor wax. The walls were lined with bulletin boards covered in notices about zoning hearings and property tax deadlines, things that mattered to people who still believed in the orderly processes of civic life. I took a number and waited for 40 minutes on a plastic chair that made my back ache. An elderly man 2 seats over was reading the same page of a newspaper over and over again. A young mother tried to keep her toddler from running into traffic while filling out forms. The clock on the wall seemed to move backward. When they finally called my number, I walked up to the counter and told the young woman what I needed. I want to see the deed for my property, I said. 412 Maple Drive. She typed, clicked, scrolled. Her nails were painted a bright coral that reminded me of the flamingo lawn ornaments my neighbor used to have before the HOA made him take them down. She frowned, typed again, scrolled again. Her frown deepened. Ma'am, she said slowly, according to our records, this property was transferred 8 months ago. The current owner is listed as Garrett Hollis. She turned the screen so I could see it, pointing to a line near the bottom. You're listed here as a resident, but not an owner. I stared at the screen. There it was in black and white, my name, reduced to a footnote in my own life. Marlene Hollis, resident. Like I was a tenant. Like I was a guest in the house I'd spent 52 years building into a home. That can't be right, I heard myself say. I never agreed to transfer anything. I signed a power of attorney for bills. Not this. The woman's face softened into something like pity. I hated it. I wanted her to be indifferent, businesslike, anything but pitying. Pity meant she'd already decided I was a victim. And I wasn't ready to be a victim. Not yet. Ma'am, I can only tell you what's in the system. If you believe there's been an error or something else, you might want to consult with an attorney. I thanked her and walked out into the parking lot. The sun was too bright. The pavement was too hot. Everything was too much, too sharp, too real. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. He had me over a barrel, and I didn't even know the barrel existed. That evening, the realtor called. A man this time, with one of those smooth salesman voices that make everything sound like a favor he's doing you. The kind of voice that would be right at home selling used cars or timeshares. Mrs. Hollis, this is Brad Emerson from Prestige Realty. I just wanted to touch base about the property on Maple Drive. Your son mentioned you'd be vacating by Friday, and I wanted to see if you needed any assistance coordinating the move. We have some great partnerships with local moving companies. I'm not moving, I said. Silence. Then a little laugh, The kind people use when they think you've made a joke they don't understand. I'm sorry. I think there might be some confusion. The listing is active. We already have 2 parties interested in showings this week. One of them is pre-approved for— There's no confusion, I said. I live here. I'm not leaving. More silence. When he spoke again, the smoothness had curdled into something harder. Mrs. Hollis, I understand this might be a difficult transition, but the property owner, your son, has made his intentions very clear. Perhaps you two should discuss this privately. I don't want to get in the middle of a family matter. Then don't, I said, and hung up. I sat there in the living room, in Earl's old chair that I still couldn't bring myself to sit in most days because it smelled like him, and that made my chest ache. And I looked around at my house. The walls I'd painted 3 times over the decades. Once yellow, then green. Now the soft cream I'd chosen after Earl died because I needed something different, but not too different. The window where I'd hung curtains that Tanya once called dated, in that way she had of making insults sound like observations. The corner where the Christmas tree went every year. The spot worn into the floor from all those times we'd dragged it in and out. 52 years. More than half my life. Every memory I had of Earl, every trace of the world we'd built together. It was all here, soaked into the walls and floors like water into wood. The marks on the doorframe where we'd measured Garrett's height every birthday. The patch on the kitchen ceiling from when he'd thrown a baseball inside and cracked the light fixture. The garden out back where I'd scattered Earl's ashes under the rose bush because he'd always said roses were the only flowers worth growing. And my son wanted to sell it out from under me like I was just another piece of furniture to be moved. I need to tell you how we got here. Not the paperwork, not the legal tricks. I mean how a mother ends up standing in her own house wondering if her son ever loved her at all. Garrett was a good boy once. I know every mother says that, and I know it doesn't mean much. But I need you to understand that the man who made that phone call isn't the same person I raised. Or maybe he is, and I just couldn't see it. I don't know anymore. When he was small, he used to bring me flowers from the garden, dandelions mostly, clutched in his sweaty little fists. He'd present them like they were roses, so proud, and I'd put them in a juice glass on the kitchen windowsill, and we'd both admire them until they wilted. He used to fall asleep on the couch with peanut butter on his chin, and I'd carry him to bed even when he got too heavy, even when my back screamed at me to stop. He was afraid of thunderstorms until he was almost 10. I'd find him in our bedroom during bad ones, curled up at the foot of the bed like a puppy, and Earl would pretend not to notice while I smoothed his hair and told him the thunder was just clouds bumping into each other. He believed me. He believed everything I told him back then. Earl and I gave that boy everything we could. Not everything we wanted to. We didn't have much. But everything we could. When he wanted to go to college, we took out a second mortgage. I remember sitting at this very table with Earl, going over the numbers, knowing it would mean 10 more years of payments, knowing we might not have the house fully paid off until we were in our 70s. He's smart, Earl said. He could do something with his life, more than what we did. So we signed the papers. We did it gladly. When Garrett graduated, we were so proud. We drove 4 hours to the ceremony and sat in the nosebleed section of a giant auditorium and cried when his name was called. He waved at us from the stage, and for a moment, I felt like all of it. The second mortgage, the extra shifts I'd taken at the hospital cafeteria, the vacations we'd never gone on, all of it was worth it. When he got his first job, we threw a party in the backyard. Hot dogs and hamburgers and that cheap beer Earl liked because it reminded him of his father. Garrett's friends came, and neighbors, and even his boss stopped by for half an hour. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what we worked for. He's going to be okay. When he met Tanya, we welcomed her like she was already family. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe we made it too easy. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. The kind of beautiful that makes you feel underdressed just standing next to her. Perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect posture. She looked at me with cool, appraising eyes that first time Garrett brought her home, and I felt myself being measured and found wanting. "It's so cozy," she said, looking around the living room, "like a time capsule." I made her my special lasagna, the one I only make for important occasions because it takes all day. She picked at it and said she was watching her carbs. Earl caught my eye across the table and gave me a look that said more than words. The wedding cost $8,000. A gift, we called it, even though it was most of our savings. The ceremony was at a venue Tanya chose. All white drapes and crystal chandeliers and staff in white gloves who looked at Earl's J.C. Penney suit like he'd wandered in from the wrong party. "You really didn't have to do this, Mom," Garrett said when I handed him the check. But he took it, and he cashed it that same week. After that came the down payment on their house. $40,000, pulled from my retirement account because they couldn't quite qualify for the loan amount they needed. Garrett sat in my kitchen and explained it all in financial terms. I didn't quite understand. Something about debt-to-income ratios and interest rates and how they'd pay me back once things stabilize. Things never stabilized. There was always something else. The car when Tanya's broke down. "It's an emergency, Mom." The loans for home improvements that were never paid back and eventually never mentioned again. The kids' private school tuition. The vacation to Hawaii because Tanya's been so stressed she needs a break. They never invited me. I saw the photos on Facebook. My grandchildren building sandcastles on a beach I'd helped pay for, and I wasn't even there. There was the dental work Sophie needed, which insurance didn't cover. There was Marcus's summer camp, the expensive one with horses and archery. There was Tanya's business venture that failed after 6 months and was never spoken of again. There was the time their pipes burst and they needed $10,000 immediately to fix it before the house flooded. Each time, Garrett would call with that particular voice, the one that made me feel like I was being unreasonable if I didn't help immediately. The one that somehow made his problems feel like my failures. "Mom, we're really struggling here. I hate to ask, but..." He never hated to ask. He just hated that he had to pretend to hate it. I kept a list once, not to throw in anyone's face, just to remember, to keep track. After a while, I stopped updating it. The numbers had gotten too big and too painful to look at. When I finally added it all up, the second mortgage, the down payment, all those loans and emergencies, it came to over $200,000. More than Earl and I had made in most years combined. Gone, all of it, into a hole that never got smaller, no matter how much I threw in. Earl saw what was happening before I did. He always did. "That woman is measuring our coffins, Marley," he said once, after a dinner where Tanya had spent the whole meal talking about how hard it was to maintain their house, how expensive everything was, how some people had it easier because they'd bought when prices were low. She'd looked right at me when she said that, and I'd pretended not to notice. "She's just stressed," I told Earl. "They're young. They're figuring things out." He shook his head but didn't argue. That was Earl's way. He'd say his piece once and then let it go, trusting me to come around in my own time. I wish he'd pushed harder. I wish I'd listened. After he died, things changed faster than I could track. Garrett's visits got shorter. His calls got rarer. When he did come by, there was always a reason. Something that needed signing, something that needed fixing, something that needed money. The conversations we used to have, the real ones about life and memories and nothing in particular, those just stopped. And always, his boots on my carpet. Tracking in dirt, I'd spend the next 3 days cleaning, leaving marks that said, louder than any words, "You don't matter." On Tuesday, Garrett texted me. "Friday, I mean it. I can send movers if you need help." I read it 3 times. The casualness of it, the way he'd reduced the dismantling of my entire life to a logistics problem, it made something shift inside me. Not break. I was past breaking. Something harder than that. Something that had been sleeping for a long time and was finally waking up. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I started going through my house like I was seeing it for the first time. In the bedroom closet, behind the box of Earl's old shirts I still couldn't bring myself to donate, I found the folder. The one Garrett had brought that day. The one with the yellow tabs. He'd left me a copy of what I'd signed, probably required by law, probably something he'd hoped I'd never look at. I sat on the edge of the bed. Our bed. The bed where Earl had proposed to me again on our 40th anniversary, just because he felt like it. The bed where he'd taken his last breath while I held his hand, and I spread the papers out in front of me. The print was small, dense, full of words that seemed designed to confuse. But I'd been married to a man who read every contract twice, who taught me that the important stuff is always in the parts they hope you'll skip. It took me an hour, but I found it. Buried in paragraph after paragraph of legal language, there it was. A transfer of deed. Not a power of attorney. Not permission to pay my bills. A complete transfer of ownership from me to my son, in consideration of care and support to be provided. Care and support. He hadn't provided either. He'd just taken. I sat there on that bed where Earl had died, where I'd held his hand and promised him I'd be okay, and I understood for the first time exactly what had been done to me. Wednesday morning, my neighbor Dottie came over with a jar of her homemade blackberry jam. She was 82, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business, but only shared it when she thought it would help. She'd been my neighbor for 31 years, ever since she moved in after her husband passed. "I heard about the listing," she said, settling into the kitchen chair like she planned to stay a while. "The Hendersons told me. They saw it online?" I poured her a cup of coffee. No point pretending. In a neighborhood like this, secrets had a shelf life of about 12 hours. "It's complicated," I said, which was the understatement of the century. Dottie stirred her coffee slowly, watching me with those bright, knowing eyes. She had cataracts. She was always complaining about them, but somehow she still saw everything. "Marlene," she said, "I've been your neighbor for 31 years. I was there when you brought Garrett home from the hospital. I was there when Earl passed. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't know what's happening." I sat down across from her, suddenly very tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "I heard him yelling at you," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "Last month, through the window. The whole block heard, even if they won't say so. That's not how a son talks to his mother." I tried to remember. Last month was a blur. Garrett had come by more often than usual, always with some new form to sign, some new arrangement he wanted to make. There had been raised voices. I remembered feeling confused, overwhelmed, like I was being spun around until I couldn't tell which way was up. "I don't remember what we argued about," I admitted. "Doesn't matter what it was about," Dottie said firmly. What matters is how he spoke to you. Like you were in his way. Like you were a problem to be solved. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was thin and spotted with age, but her grip was strong. Honey, you need to fight this. You can't just let them take your home. I don't know how, I said. And I meant it. At 76, after a lifetime of keeping the peace, of smoothing things over, of putting everyone else first, I didn't know how to fight. I wasn't sure I had any fight left. Dottie squeezed my hand. Then let me tell you something my mother told me when I was young and stupid and thought love meant letting people walk all over you. She leaned in close, her voice low and fierce. You're not a carpet, Marlene. Stop letting people wipe their feet on you. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time thinking about carpets. About the one in my living room, the one I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees for years while my son tracked dirt across it without a second thought. About all the messes I'd cleaned up, all the stains I'd worked out, all the times I'd made things nice again so nobody would have to see what was underneath. I wasn't about to let them sell me down the river. I went to the hall closet and dug through the box of old papers until I found Earl's address book. The leather cover was worn soft from his hands, the pages yellowed and brittle. I flipped through names I hadn't thought about in years until I found the one I was looking for. Mr. Brennan, the attorney who'd handled our will, our house purchase, every legal matter we'd ever needed help with. The number was disconnected. Of course it was. Mr. Brennan must have been 80 when we last saw him, and that was a decade ago. He was probably dead by now, or in a home somewhere, staring at walls and not recognizing his own children. But then I remembered something. His daughter had gone to law school. What was her name? Lisa. Lisa Brennan. Earl had been so proud when he heard, had sent her a card and a small check for graduation, even though we didn't really know her that well. I found her online in 10 minutes. She had her own practice now, just 2 towns over. A small firm by the look of the website, but the reviews were good. Tough but fair. Really fought for me. Didn't talk down to me. That last one mattered more than I would have expected. At my age, people talk down to you constantly. Doctors, salespeople, even your own family. Finding someone who treated you like an adult felt like finding water in a desert. I dialed before I could lose my nerve. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt different. Not fear, something more like determination. Brennan Law Office. This is Lisa speaking. Lisa. This is Marlene Hollis, Earl's wife. You might not remember me, but Mrs. Hollis. Her voice warmed instantly. Of course I remember you. You and Mr. Hollis were so kind to me. I still have the card he sent when I passed the bar. He wrote something about how the world needed more people who weren't afraid to fight for what was right. I think about that a lot. She paused. I was so sorry to hear about his passing. He was a good man. He was, I said, and for a moment I couldn't speak around the lump in my throat. Earl would have been so proud to hear that his words had mattered to someone, had stuck with them all these years. He always believed in encouraging young people, in investing in the next generation, unlike our son, who only knew how to take. Lisa, I need help. I think my son has done something illegal, and I don't know what to do. There was a brief silence. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something harder, more professional. The voice of someone who'd been in courtrooms and wasn't afraid of them. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I talked for almost an hour, starting from the day Earl died and working forward to the phone call on Monday. Lisa listened without interrupting, only asking an occasional question to clarify a detail. When I finished, I felt emptied out, like I'd been carrying a heavy bag for miles and had finally set it down. "Mrs. Hollis," Lisa said slowly, "what you've described is textbook elder financial abuse. I've seen cases like this before, but rarely with this much documentation. Your son and his wife made a lot of mistakes. They left trails everywhere. That's going to help us." "You think I have a chance?" "I think you have more than a chance. I think you have a case."
5 days. He gave his own mother 5 days to pack up 52 years of memories and leave. Now ask yourself, what would you do?
Lisa Brennan came to my house that same afternoon. She was around 40, with her father's sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. She wore a navy suit that looked expensive, but not flashy, the kind of clothes people wear when they want to be taken seriously without drawing too much attention. She sat at my kitchen table, that table that had seen so much, and spread out the papers I'd signed 8 months ago. She read them twice, making little marks in the margins with a red pen, her expression getting darker with each page. "Mrs. Hollis," she said, after studying them for a long moment. "What your son did has a name. It's called undue influence. He got you to sign over your property under circumstances designed to impair your judgment, right after visiting your husband's grave while you were grieving and vulnerable. The timing alone is damning." She pointed to a section near the bottom of one page. "And this language here about care and support to be provided, that's a promise that was never kept. It's a condition of the transfer. If he didn't fulfill it, and based on what you're telling me, he didn't, the whole thing could be voidable." "Can we really prove that?" I asked. I wanted to believe her, but hope felt dangerous. Hope had gotten me into this mess in the first place. "We can," she said firmly. "But I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that?" I nodded. "Has your son ever pressured you to give him money? Made you feel obligated, guilty, or afraid if you didn't comply?" I thought about all those years of loans that were never repaid. The second mortgage for his college. The down payment for his house. The endless small requests that added up to a fortune. The way Garrett would sigh when I hesitated. The way Tanya would mention how hard things were. The way I'd feel sick with guilt for even considering saying no to my own child. "Yes," I said. But I never thought of it as pressure. "He's my son. You help your children." "You help your children," Lisa agreed. "You don't let them rob you blind." She made a note. "What about his wife? Tanya, you said? Has she ever discussed your property as if it were already hers?" And then I remembered the phone. Garrett's phone, sitting on my kitchen table last month when he went to the bathroom. The screen lighting up with Tanya's message. I'd taken a picture of it. I didn't even know why at the time. Just instinct, something that felt wrong. I found my phone and scrolled through until I found the photo. There it was, slightly blurry but readable. "Did she sign the Meadowbrook papers yet? I already told the realtor we'd close by end of month. Can't wait to gut that kitchen." Lisa looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who's just been handed exactly what they needed. "Mrs. Hollis," she said, "this is what we call evidence." The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal filings, document requests, and long conversations with Lisa about strategy. I learned words I'd never heard before. Undue influence, fiduciary duty, constructive fraud. I learned how many ways there were for people to steal from their own family, and how many of those ways left fingerprints. Garrett found out I'd hired a lawyer when he was served with papers demanding the sale be halted. He called me that night, furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted. I could hear Tanya in the background, her voice high and sharp, saying things I couldn't quite make out. "This is family business." "You don't bring lawyers into family business." "You brought lawyers into family business when you tricked me into signing over my house," I said. My voice was calm. I barely recognized it as my own. It was Earl's voice, the one he used when something was too important for yelling. "I didn't trick you. You signed those papers willingly. You're just confused now because you're old and you don't remember things right." That was the moment I knew, really knew, that there was nothing left of my son worth saving. The boy who brought me dandelions, who was afraid of thunder, who cried when his goldfish died. That boy was gone. This was someone else. Someone Tanya had made, or someone who'd been hiding inside all along. "I remember enough," I said. "I remember Tanya couldn't wait to gut my kitchen." Silence, long and heavy. "If you fight this," Garrett said finally, his voice dropping into something cold and threatening, "you'll never see the grandchildren again. I'll make sure of it." I closed my eyes. The grandchildren. Sophie and Marcus, 8 and 6. I saw them maybe 4 times a year, always under Tanya's watchful eye, always with a time limit. She'd never left me alone with them, not once, like she thought I might poison them with something. Love, maybe, or the truth about who their parents really were. Sophie had her father's eyes. Marcus had Earl's smile. Every time I saw them, I felt like I was looking at ghosts of people I used to know, traces of the family I used to have. "Garrett," I said, "you can't use those children as weapons. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to me." "Fair?" He laughed, an ugly sound. "You want to talk about fair? Fair is me taking care of a house you can't maintain anymore. Fair is me making sure you don't fall and break a hip with no one there to find you. Fair is me doing what's best for this family even when you're too stubborn to see it. Selling my home out from under me is what's best for the family. That train has left the station, Mom. The sale is happening. The only question is whether you make it easy or hard." "Then I guess I'm making it hard," I said, and hung up. I sat there holding the phone long after the call ended, listening to the silence of my house. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping briefly across the curtains. I wondered what Earl would think of all this, what he would say if he could see his son now, making threats to his own mother. I think he would be heartbroken. I think he would be furious. I think, if he were still alive, none of this would ever have happened. Because Garrett was always a little afraid of his father, in the way sons sometimes are. He would never have dared. But Earl was gone, and I was alone. And the only person who could fight for me now was me. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to all the sounds of my house, the creak of the settling foundation, the tick of the clock in the hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Sounds I'd heard so many times they'd become part of me, like the rhythm of my own breathing. I thought about giving up. I'm not proud of it, but I did. 76 years old, alone, going up against my own son in court. What was I thinking? Maybe it would be easier to just accept it. Pack my things, move to Meadowbrook or wherever they wanted to put me. Let them have the house and the money and whatever peace that would buy. Earl's voice came to me then, not a ghost, not a vision, just the memory of how he sounded when he was being serious. "Marley," he'd say, "you're the strongest woman I know. You just don't know it yet." I got out of bed and walked to the dresser, to the photograph I kept there. Our wedding day, 1973. Earl in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big. Me in a dress my mother had made from a pattern she'd found in a magazine. We looked so young, so hopeful, so completely unaware of everything that was coming. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered to the photo. "I'm so tired, Earl. I'm so goddamn tired." The photo didn't answer, of course, but I stood there looking at it until the first gray light of dawn started to seep through the curtains, and by then I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to give up. Not because I was strong or brave or any of those words people use when they want to make fighting sound noble. I was going to keep fighting because this house was all I had left of the life we'd built together, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me, not without a fight that they'd remember. The case moved faster than I expected. Lisa had connections, knew which judges were sympathetic to elder abuse cases, knew how to frame the argument so it would land. We had more evidence than I'd realized. Dottie gave a sworn statement about hearing Garrett yell at me. 3 other neighbors corroborated it. They'd heard things too, over the months and years. They'd just never known what to do about it. Mrs. Henderson across the street said she'd seen Garrett storm out of my house once, slamming the door so hard her china rattled. The bank manager who'd been present when I opened the joint account with Garrett came forward. "She looked confused," he told Lisa's investigator. "Lost." I asked her twice if she was sure, and each time she looked at her son before answering. He kept touching her arm, kind of guiding her through it. I should have said something. I've felt bad about it ever since. We found text messages between Tanya and her sister, talking about Mom's house, as if they already owned it, planning renovations, calculating how much they could get if they sold it and bought something bigger. One message read, "Finally, I've been waiting 12 years for that old bat to get out of the way." Another said, "G says she doesn't have long anyway. Might as well get things in order." Reading that one, I had to put the papers down and just breathe for a while. My own son, talking about my death like it was a scheduling inconvenience. Lisa found financial records too. Garrett had been making payments on a boat I never knew about, paid for with money from my accounts. There were charges at restaurants I'd never eaten at, stores I'd never visited. He'd been siphoning off money for months, small amounts that wouldn't be noticed, like a thief taking just a little from the till each day. "They got greedy," Lisa said during one of our preparation sessions. "Greedy people always leave a trail." The day of the hearing, I wore my good blue dress. The one Earl always said brought out my eyes. I'd had it for 15 years and it was a little dated, but I didn't care. It was mine, and it made me feel like myself. I sat in the courtroom with Lisa beside me and tried not to look at Garrett and Tanya across the aisle, but I could feel them looking at me. I could feel Tanya's anger like heat from a fire. Their lawyer was young, barely out of law school from the look of him. He shuffled papers nervously and kept glancing at Garrett like he was hoping for guidance that never came. Lisa had done her research. Apparently, Garrett had hired the cheapest attorney he could find, convinced this would be an easy win. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses that she looked over rather than through. She had the tired, patient expression of someone who had seen every kind of human cruelty and was no longer surprised by any of it. Lisa presented our case methodically. The circumstances of the signing, grief, confusion, pressure, the lack of independent legal counsel, the failure to provide the promised care and support, the evidence of premeditation in Tanya's text messages, the pattern of financial exploitation stretching back years. She showed the judge the photo of Tanya's text. "Can't wait to gut that kitchen." She read aloud from the messages about that old bat. She presented the bank manager's statement and Dottie's statement, and the statements from the neighbors who'd heard things they couldn't unhear. Garrett's lawyer tried to argue that I'd signed voluntarily, that I was competent, that this was simply a case of a confused elderly woman who'd changed her mind. The judge cut him off. "Counsel, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by the plaintiff. I've seen the text messages. I've read the witness statements, and I've been practicing law long enough to recognize undue influence when I see it." She turned to look at Garrett directly. "Mr. Hollis, you took advantage of your mother's grief and trust to steal her home. That's what this is. Theft. The fact that you're related doesn't make it better. It makes it worse." Garrett stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, I was trying to help her. She can't take care of herself anymore. She needs—" "Mr. Hollis, sit down. I did not ask for your testimony." He sat. Tanya grabbed his arm and whispered something sharp, and he shook her off. The judge shuffled some papers, made a note, then looked up again. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that the deed transfer was executed under conditions of undue influence. The transfer is hereby voided. The property at 412 Maple Drive is restored to the sole ownership of Marlene Hollis." She paused. "Additionally, the defendant is ordered to pay all legal costs incurred by the plaintiff in this matter." Beside me, Lisa squeezed my hand. Across the aisle, Tanya whispered something sharp to Garrett. He shook his head, looking dazed, like he'd just walked into a wall he hadn't seen coming. "Mr. Hollis," the judge added, "I strongly suggest you take some time to reflect on how you've treated your mother. The law can restore her property. It cannot restore the relationship you've damaged." Garrett turned to look at me then. For a moment, I thought I saw something. Regret, maybe, or shame. But then Tanya tugged his arm and whispered again, and whatever I'd seen disappeared behind a mask of resentment. They left without speaking to me. I watched them go. My son and his wife, walking out of the courtroom like strangers, like people I'd never known at all. "Mrs. Hollis?" Lisa touched my shoulder. "It's over. You won." I nodded, but the word didn't feel right. Won. What had I won? My house, yes. My legal rights. But I'd lost my son. Or maybe I'd finally admitted that I'd lost him a long time ago. "Let's go home," I said. The locksmith came that same afternoon, a young man with a friendly face and a toolbox that looked like it weighed more than I did. He hummed while he worked, some pop song I didn't recognize. "Changing all the locks?" he asked as he examined my front door. "All of them," I confirmed. He worked quickly and efficiently. Front door, back door, garage, new deadbolts, new keys. When he finished, he handed me a small envelope with 4 shiny copies. "Bad breakup?" he asked, not unkindly. I almost laughed. Something like that. After he left, I walked through my house, fully mine again, and touched things. The walls, the door frames, the worn spot on the kitchen counter where I'd kneaded bread for 40 years. Everything was exactly as it had been, and yet everything was different. The air felt lighter somehow. The silence felt like peace instead of loneliness. I ended up in the living room, standing on the carpet that had caused me so many hours of scrubbing. I looked down at it and saw, near the door, a faint trace of dried mud. Garrett's boots from his last visit. I went to the closet and got out the brush and the bowl. I filled it with soapy water and carried it to the living room. And then I stopped. For a long moment, I just stood there looking at that stain, at all the years it represented, all the times I'd gotten down on my knees to clean up messes that weren't mine to clean. Then I put the brush back in the closet, poured the water down the drain, and sat down in Earl's chair. The stain could wait. Or maybe it wouldn't be cleaned at all. Maybe I'd buy a new carpet, one without any history, one that was only mine. Or maybe I'd leave it there as a reminder of who I used to be and who I wasn't going to be anymore. The weeks after the hearing were quiet, quieter than I expected. Garrett didn't call, didn't text, didn't come by to apologize or explain or yell or anything at all. It was like I'd ceased to exist for him, like the court's ruling had erased me from his world along with his ownership of my house. I found I didn't mind as much as I thought I would. Lisa had warned me that he might try to retaliate by keeping me from the grandchildren, and she'd started looking into what legal options I had there. But for now, I decided not to push it. Sophie and Marcus didn't need to be pulled into a war between adults. When they were older, when they could understand, maybe I'd reach out. Maybe they'd reach out to me, or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't something I could force. I had other things to think about. The house needed work, real work, the kind I'd been putting off because I couldn't afford it and didn't want to ask Garrett for help. Lisa helped me find a contractor who was honest and didn't treat me like I was made of glass. We fixed the leak in the bathroom, replaced the broken step on the back porch, painted the kitchen cabinets that Tanya had wanted to gut. I chose a pale yellow for the cabinets. It reminded me of buttercups, of spring, of all the things Earl used to say about new beginnings. Dottie came over for coffee every few days. We didn't always talk about what had happened. Sometimes we just sat together, two old women who'd lived long enough to know that silence could be a gift. "You did a brave thing," she told me once. "I did a necessary thing," I corrected. "There's a difference." She smiled. "Maybe, but necessity doesn't make it easy. You could have given up. A lot of people do." I thought about all the women like me, women who sign things they don't understand, who trust people who don't deserve it, who wake up one day to find that their whole lives have been signed away. How many of them fight back? How many of them even know they can? "I got lucky," I said. "I had help. A lot of people don't." Dottie nodded. "Then maybe," she said, "when you're ready, you can be the help for someone else." 3 months after the court ruling, I got a letter. Not from Garrett, from Tanya. It was short, printed on expensive paper with a letterhead from some company I'd never heard of. Very formal, very cold. She wanted me to know that she and Garrett were moving to Portland for a job opportunity. The children were adjusting well to the idea. She hoped I'd find peace in my remaining years. The words themselves were polite enough, but I could read between the lines. They were running away from the embarrassment of losing, away from the neighbors who now knew what they'd tried to do, away from me. Part of me wanted to feel something, anger maybe, or sadness. But mostly I just felt tired and a little empty. I showed the letter to Dottie, who snorted and said, "Good riddance to bad rubbish," which made me laugh even though I didn't really feel like laughing. I wrote back. Just a few lines, nothing elaborate. "Dear Tanya, I hope the move goes well. I hope Garrett finds what he's looking for. I hope Sophie and Marcus grow up happy and kind. If any of you ever want to talk, really talk, you know where to find me. I'll be here. Marlene." I never got a response. I didn't expect one. A year later, I'm still here. Still in my house, still sitting in Earl's chair in the evenings, still drinking coffee from the same mug I've used for 30 years, still watching the same birds at the feeder outside my kitchen window. Some things have changed. I hired a cleaning service to come once a week. It's an indulgence I never would have allowed myself before, but Lisa pointed out that I'd spent enough years cleaning up other people's messes. Now I save my energy for the things that matter. The garden, my watercolors, the long walks I take every morning around the neighborhood. I joined a book club at the library. We meet every other Tuesday, 8 women between 60 and 85, reading things we probably wouldn't have chosen on our own. Last month, it was a mystery set in Iceland. The month before, a memoir about a woman who walked the entire Pacific Crest Trail at age 62. I didn't love every book, but I loved having people to talk to, having somewhere to be, having a reason to get dressed up and put on lipstick. I volunteer at the food bank on Wednesdays. It's hard work, standing, sorting, lifting boxes that are heavier than they should be, but it feels good to be useful, to know that my hands are doing something that matters. The other volunteers are mostly younger than me, but they don't treat me like I'm fragile. They give me jobs just like anyone else, and they laugh at my jokes. And sometimes we go out for lunch afterward and complain about our families. I have dinner with Dottie and some other neighborhood women every Sunday night. We rotate houses and everyone brings something. Last week, I made my lasagna. The good one, the one I used to make for special occasions. Everyone took seconds, and Mrs. Henderson asked for the recipe, and for a moment, I felt like someone worth knowing. My life is fuller than it's been in years, even though, or maybe because, my son is no longer in it. I don't know if Garrett will ever come back. I don't know if he'll ever apologize, or if an apology would even mean anything after everything that happened. What I know is that I can't spend my remaining years waiting for him to become the person I wanted him to be. I did that for too long already. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the boy he used to be, the one who brought me dandelions, the one who was afraid of thunder, the one who cried when his goldfish died and asked me if fishes went to heaven. I don't know what happened to that boy. Maybe he grew up. Maybe Tanya changed him. Maybe he was never really who I thought he was, and I just saw what I wanted to see because that's what mothers do. Some doors close, and you realize they were never really open to begin with.
Marlene did exactly what I would have done. When someone has already stolen from you, there's nothing left to negotiate. Some people say, but it's family. Well, family doesn't put your home up for sale while you're still living in it. She didn't fight back out of spite. She fought back to survive. And that takes courage.
I'm not the only one this has happened to. I know that now. Since the case became public record, since people in my neighborhood started talking, I've had 5 different women come up to me. At church, at the grocery store, at the library, and tell me their own stories. Daughters who emptied bank accounts, sons who forged signatures, grandchildren who showed up with papers to sign and left with everything. It happens more than anyone wants to admit. We don't talk about it because it's shameful, because we blame ourselves, because we don't want people to know that our own families have turned on us. But I'm done being ashamed. I didn't do anything wrong. I trusted my son, and he betrayed that trust. That's on him, not me. So if this story sounds like yours, if you're sitting there thinking about that document you signed, that conversation you had, that look in someone's eye that didn't quite match their words, I want you to know you're not alone, and it's not too late. Find a lawyer. Find a friend. Find someone who will stand with you and tell you that you deserve better. Because you do. We all do. I think about Mrs. Patterson sometimes, the neighbor who died alone and wasn't found for 4 days. Garrett used to bring her up whenever he wanted me to sign something, or agree to something. You don't want to end up like Mrs. Patterson. It was a threat disguised as concern, a way to make me feel vulnerable and scared and dependent on him. But here's the thing I've realized. Mrs. Patterson didn't die because she lived alone. She died because she was alone in a different way. Alone without community, without friends, without people checking in on her. I'm alone in my house, yes, but I'm not alone like that. I have Dottie. I have the book club. I have the food bank volunteers and the Sunday dinner ladies and Lisa, who still calls to check on me even though the case is over. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and living with family isn't the same as being loved. I keep wondering, I can't be the only one whose own child looked at them and saw a payday instead of a parent. If this story feels familiar, even just a little, I'd like to know. It helps somehow, knowing you're not alone in it. The house is quiet tonight. Not lonely quiet, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that settles around you like a blanket, that reminds you that silence isn't always an absence. Sometimes it's a presence. Sometimes it's room to breathe. I'm sitting in Earl's chair, watching the last light fade outside the window. The birds have gone to sleep. The streetlights are flickering on. Somewhere down the block, I can hear children laughing. Other people's grandchildren, other people's joy. It doesn't hurt the way it used to. It just is. Tomorrow, I'll wake up and drink my coffee and check on my garden and maybe call Dottie to see if she wants to walk. I'll read my book and paint my watercolors and live my life, one ordinary day at a time. It's not the life I expected to have at 76. I thought I'd be spending holidays with grandchildren, baking cookies at Christmas, watching Sophie and Marcus grow up. I thought my son would call me on Sundays, ask how I was doing, maybe come by for dinner sometimes. I thought the end of my life would look like the middle of it, only slower and softer. Instead, I'm here, alone in my house on a Tuesday night, listening to the quiet and learning to be okay with it. But it's mine, every inch of it. Every moment. And no one, not my son, not his wife, not anyone, is ever going to take that away from me again. This is my house, my home, my story, and I'm the only one who gets to decide how it ends.